I wasn't kidnapped. I was negotiated. My father's office smelled like oak and consequence. I had been in that room hundreds of times. When I was 7, sitting in the chair across from his desk while he explained that crying over a broken toy was not something men did. When I was 14, receiving the news that I would be attending a boarding school in Geneva because the local options were insufficient. When I was 22, being informed that my choice of architecture as a graduate study was acceptable provided I intended to apply it to the family's development portfolio and not to the romantic aspiration of designing public libraries. Every significant reduction of my life had been announced in that room. I did not know, walking in on a Thursday in November, that this would be the final one. My father was at his desk. My mother was seated to the left, which was unusual. She was the kind of woman who had perfected the art of being present without being involved, who attended important family occasions at a slight angle, as if positioning herself sideways made her a partial witness rather than a full one. My uncle Harlan was near the window, which told me something significant was being decided. Harlan appeared for 2 types of family events, the celebratory ones and the ones that required a witness. I looked around the room and understood before anyone spoke that the chair across from my father's desk had been arranged for me specifically. I sat. My father set a folder on the desk. "You're getting married," he said. He used the same tone he used to announce the Geneva school. Informational. Final. The tone of a man who had decided that the distance between a conclusion and a conversation was an administrative inconvenience he had eliminated from his process years ago. "Married?" I said. "Yes." "To whom?" "Serafina Vale." I looked at him. Serafina Vale was the daughter of Alistair Vale, whose financial empire was the kind that appeared in magazine profiles and court proceedings in approximately equal measure. She had attended 3 universities without finishing a degree at any of them. She had been photographed at a Geneva party 3 years ago in circumstances that had been described in the press with the careful diplomatic language of sources who wanted to imply a great deal without being sued for it. Unstable was the word that had circulated. Brilliant was the word her family's publicists preferred. I had never met her. "The Vale Group has agreed to a capital injection of $200,000 into Ashford Development," my father said. "In exchange for the alliance." "Alliance?" I repeated. "Marriage," my mother said softly from her sideways position. As if the word from her would make the thing softer. "The alliance formalizes the relationship between the families and secures a partnership that benefits both operations," my father continued. "The Vale Group accesses Ashford's regional development infrastructure. We access their capital." "And what do I access?" I asked. He looked at me steadily. "You access a future that the family has secured for you." I looked at the folder. "There are preliminary documents," he said. "The formal contract is in preparation, but we've signed a letter of intent that outlines." "Show me," I said. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. I looked at the letter of intent. 3 pages, letterhead from a firm I recognized as one my father used for transactions he preferred to keep at a legal arm's length from the family name. The language was precise and contractual and used the word parties in the way legal documents use it, to reduce human beings to elements of an arrangement. Party A, Ashford Development, represented by R. Ashford. Party B, Vale Group, represented by A. Vale. And at the bottom of the second page, under the section titled Family Representative and Signatory, my name. Elliot Ashford. Signed. I looked at the signature. It was mine in the way a copy is the original, close enough that a person who knew my handwriting casually would not question it, different enough that I knew immediately it was not something my hand had produced. I looked up. My father was watching me with the composure of someone who had anticipated this moment and had decided, in advance, how to receive it. "You forged my signature," I said. "We signed on your behalf," he said. "As we are legally permitted to do as representatives of your interests within the family structure." That is not what legally permitted means. Harlan has confirmed the position. I looked at Harlan, who looked at the window, which was its own kind of answer. I looked back at my father. I did not shout. I want to be clear about this because I have replayed this moment many times since, examining the decision I made in those first seconds. I did not shout because shouting was what he had taught me to associate with weakness, with the boy who cried over the broken toy, with the 14-year-old who had protested the Geneva school in a way that had been recorded as emotional and held against me at subsequent meetings. I looked at the signature on the letter of intent. Then I looked at the $200,000 capital figure. Then I looked at my father's face. And I thought, with the particular cold clarity of someone arriving at a truth that has been approaching for years but has only now become fully visible. So this is what I'm worth. not as an accusation directed at anyone in the room. As information. The arithmetic of the arrangement laid plainly before me. A capital injection with a human cost. My name on a document I had not written. A future selected, organized, and initialed on my behalf by people who believed that acting in my interest and acting without my knowledge were compatible positions. When? I asked. My father blinked once. When? The wedding. Spring, he said. The timeline is. And Serafina Vale, I said. Has she been negotiated also? The room was quiet. My mother looked at her hands. Harlan coughed. My father said, the Vale family has managed their internal arrangements. Their internal arrangements. Have we met? I asked. You will be formally introduced next month. And until then I am engaged to a woman I have never met, whose name was placed beside mine on a document I didn't sign, in exchange for capital my father's company needs. It's considerably more nuanced than. Is any part of what I said inaccurate? He was quiet. I closed the folder. I handed it back across the desk. I'll need my own legal counsel to review the documents before I engage with any further stage of this process, I said. Elliot. Not a request, I said. Legal counsel. Before anything else. I stood. I left the room without raising my voice. In the hallway, I pressed my back against the wall and looked at the ceiling of a house I had grown up in and felt the specific weight of a person who has just discovered the price their family placed on them. 200,000. Not nothing. Not enough. The formal introduction was held at the Vale estate on a Saturday in December. Formal introduction. That was the language in my father's calendar invitation, as if we were two diplomatic delegations establishing first contact rather than two people being shown to each other like furniture selected for a room neither of us had designed. The Vale estate was the kind of property that declared its own significance before you reached the door. The drive was lined with something architectural, not trees exactly but the shaped descendants of trees, disciplined into a form that communicated control over even the natural world. The house itself was white, which I noted with the particular attention of someone who had spent a graduate program learning what buildings communicate about the people who commission them. White says, I have nothing to hide. White also says, I will blind you with the surface so you don't look for the underneath. My father rode with me. He spoke during the drive about the Vale Group's second quarter performance and the infrastructure synergies that the partnership would produce. I listened at the peripheral level required to avoid questions and watched the shaped trees through the window. Alistair Vale met us at the door. He was a tall man whose handshake communicated the intention of authority even when it wasn't landing precisely. He smiled the smile of someone concluding a long negotiation who is trying to appear as if the conclusion is a beginning. Elliot, he said, which was the first time he had said my name, though he had signed a letter of intent that contained it. Welcome. There were other people in the entry hall. A woman I understood to be Serafina's mother, positioned near the staircase with the particular stillness of someone who had been placed rather than standing. A family lawyer. Two members of the Vale household staff visible in peripheral corridors. Serafina was not in the entry hall. We were taken to a drawing room and offered things that we accepted for the sake of having something to hold. The two fathers talked about the partnership. The lawyers made notes. My mother, who had come despite her sideways relationship to events, looked at the artwork and occasionally smiled at things people said without connecting the smile to anything specific. At some point Alistair Vale said, I'll have Serafina come down. A silence came with that sentence. Not the ordinary pause of a man calling for his daughter. The specific silence of people adjusting their expressions in advance of something they have been briefed to manage. I noticed it. She appeared in the doorway 12 minutes later. Not making an entrance. The opposite. She stood in the doorway for a moment as if confirming the room's configuration before committing to entering it, the way someone stands at the edge of a space they are uncertain is safe. She was not what I had assembled from the press photographs and the second-hand descriptions and the careful language of sources who implied without committing. She was smaller. Not physically diminished but contained, as if she had learned to take up less space as a practical adaptation to rooms like this one, rooms full of people conducting assessments and calling it a meeting. She was wearing white, which I noted as either an absence of intention or a very specific one. Her eyes found me before they found anyone else in the room. Not flirtatiously. Not with the performed warmth of someone who had been coached on how to make a good first impression on their arranged fiancé. She looked at me with the specific attention of someone taking an accurate reading. I looked back at her with the same. The introductions happened around us. Alistair spoke her name. My father spoke mine. The lawyers exchanged something. My mother said something gracious that nobody remembered. Serafina crossed the room and stood before me and said, "Hello." "Hello," I said. "You're quieter than I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone performing confidence," she said. "Everyone who comes to this house performs confidence. I'm saving it for later." She looked at me for a moment. Something moved in her expression, not a smile exactly, the precursor to one, the consideration of it. "I've been told things about you," she said. "And I've been told things about you. Were they bad things?" "Some of them," I said honestly. "Were yours?" "Mostly inconvenient." She tilted her head. "That's a specific category." "The things they told me were less about character than about management," I said. "How to handle you. What to expect. How to present the situation to people we know." She was very still. "I haven't told anyone anything yet," I said. "Because I've only just met you." She looked at me for a long time. Then Alistair Vale's voice moved across the room, something about dinner, about the schedule of the evening, about a tour of the property that he and my father would take before the formal meal. The room reorganized itself. Serafina did not move. She was still looking at me. "They said you're stable," she said quietly enough for only me. "That you won't have the reactions the others did." "Others?" I said. She looked at her hands briefly. "There were 2 before you. Arranged introductions. One lasted 4 meetings. One lasted 11 days. What happened?" "I happened," she said simply. "Apparently." The room had moved on around us. We were a temporary island in the reorganization. "Come on," someone said, and the moment dispersed. They put us on the same floor that evening. The Vale estate had guest accommodations extensive enough that proximity was clearly chosen rather than circumstantial. My room and the room she used were separated by a sitting room that connected them, which was not subtle but was, I supposed, at least honest in its implication. I had been there 2 hours when I heard her door open. She appeared in the sitting room doorway in the tentative way she had stood at the drawing room entrance. Confirming before committing. I was sitting at the desk near the window with a book I hadn't been reading. "You're not asleep," she said. "No." She came in and sat in the chair across from the desk and pulled her knees up and looked at me. "They told me you'll leave me too," she said. The sentence arrived quietly and without staging. It was not a plea or a manipulation. It was the specific honesty of someone who has said a vulnerable thing because they have stopped caring about appearing invulnerable. I set the book down. I looked at her in the lamplight of the sitting room, small and contained and watching me with eyes that were, despite everything they had been called, not unstable. Not dangerous. Just honest in the way of someone who has been disappointed in a specific way enough times to have stopped preparing for a different outcome. "I don't know what I'm going to do," I said. "I wasn't given a choice about being here." "Neither was I." "I know. But you're still here," she said. "Tonight. Sitting with a book you're not reading." I looked at the window. "Yes," I said. "Why?" I thought about the office. The forged signature. The $200,000 figure. The careful management language from people who had made decisions about my life while I was in other rooms. Because leaving felt like giving them exactly what they expected, I said. She was quiet. Then, very softly, "The others left because of me. I know that's what they told you. It's probably true. It's probably more complicated than that." She looked at her own hands. "I get attached," she said, quickly, "to things and to people. I notice everything. I remember everything. Most people find it intense." "What kind of things do you notice?" She looked at me. "You held the contract folder with both hands when you put it back on the desk. People who are angry usually hold things with one hand or set them down hard. You were careful with it. I hadn't known I'd done that." "I noticed that," she said. "And I've been thinking about it since." The sitting room was quiet. Outside, the shaped trees stood in the dark, disciplined and still. I did not know yet what she was. What we were. What the spring and the formal contract and the 2 Fathers agreement would produce in the months ahead. But she had noticed something true about me in a room full of people performing. That was not nothing. That was, in the particular arithmetic of this situation, more than I had expected. I woke on the 3rd morning to find her in the chair. My chair, the one beside the window that I had been using as a reading position each night before sleep. She was not asleep in it. She was sitting with her knees drawn to her chest, watching me, and when I opened my eyes she did not look away or perform the startled motion of someone caught. She just looked at me steadily and waited to see what I would do. I lay still for a moment. "Good morning," I said. "You breathe differently when you're about to wake up," she said. "It changes about 3 minutes before." How long have you been here? An hour. Maybe a little more. I sat up and looked at her across the room. The morning was early, the light through the curtains the pale gray of something not yet committed to day. Serafina. I know, she said. I know it's strange. It is strange. I couldn't sleep and your room has better window light. She looked at the curtain. Mine faces the garden wall. You could have asked to switch rooms. I didn't want a different room, she said. I wanted to be near something that wasn't moving. I absorbed that. Not frightened by it. I want to be clear about that because the response I expected from myself was alarm, the healthy and reasonable alarm of a person finding someone watching them sleep. But Serafina in the chair looked less like a threat than like a person who had found the only anchor available and used it without thinking about whether the anchor would welcome the weight. What am I not moving compared to? I asked. She looked at the curtain again. Everything else in this house moves to manage me. The staff adjust their routes based on my schedule. My mother's voice changes register when she talks to me in the morning versus the evening. My father doesn't enter rooms I'm already in without announcing himself first. She paused. You walked into dinner last night without checking where I was standing first. Is that unusual? Everyone checks, she said. They've learned to. I sat on the edge of the bed and considered her for a moment in the early gray light. I'm going to ask you something and I'd like you to answer honestly, I said. She looked at me. Do you understand that sitting in someone's room while they sleep without permission is something that would frighten most people? Yes, she said. But you did it anyway. Yes. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Not constructing an evasion. Actually thinking about it. Because I calculated that you wouldn't react the way most people react and I wanted to be somewhere that felt stable, and the calculation felt more important than the permission. You calculated, I said. I calculate most things. It's how I decide. What happened when your calculations about people were wrong? Something moved across her face. The arrangements that didn't work out. Yes. I misjudged what they could tolerate, she said. I thought stability-seeking looked manageable from the outside. For some people it doesn't. I looked at the chair. At her in it, small and honest and describing herself with the accuracy of someone who has done significant self-examination without necessarily arriving at self-change. What does stability-seeking look like in practice? I asked. Past what happened this morning. She said nothing for a moment. The next 3 days showed me. She learned my schedule by the second day. Not through asking but through observation, which was a distinction she seemed to believe mattered. She knew when I preferred coffee to tea. She noticed I worked better facing a window and had quietly relocated a desk lamp in the sitting room to the position that would create less glare without mentioning she'd done it. She was jealous of the female staff in a way that was not dramatic but was constant. A low-level monitoring that expressed itself as proximity. If I spoke to a member of the household staff for more than a minute, Serafina would appear in the same room within 3 minutes. Not intervening. Just present, watching, visible. On the 4th day I stepped outside to walk the grounds and returned to find her standing at the window of the sitting room with both hands on the glass, watching me cross the lawn. I came back in. She turned. She did not apologize. She was not a person who performed contrition she didn't feel. She looked at me with the direct gaze she had been giving me since the drawing room and waited. I sat in the chair I now associated with her. I need to say something to you, I said. Not as a correction. As honesty. She sat across from me. I'm not going to leave, I said. Not today. Not as a reflex or a reaction to being overwhelmed. I don't make decisions from overwhelm. She was very still. But I won't be caged, I said. Not by the contract and not by the management of anyone in either of our families and not by your calculations about where I should be at what time. She looked at me. When you watch me sleep without permission, that is a boundary. When you move into a room because I'm talking to someone, that is a boundary. When you stand at the glass while I walk outside as if my leaving the building requires monitoring, that is a boundary. I kept my voice even. I'm telling you these things because you're clearly intelligent enough to hear them and adjust. Not because I'm threatening consequences. She was quiet. No one has told you this before, I said. It was not a question. They left instead, she said. I know. I'm not leaving. I'm talking to you. I looked at her directly. There is a difference between being present for someone and being consumed by them. I'm offering the first one. I won't survive the second one. Serafina looked at her hands. What if I don't know how to tell the difference from the inside? She said. Then we figure out what that looks like, I said. Together. With you telling me the truth about what's happening and me telling you when a line is being crossed. She was quiet for a long time. You want me to tell you when I'm about to do something that crosses the boundary, she said. Yes. Before I do it. Ideally. She looked at the window. That sounds like work. It is work, I said. But so is managing around someone who's never been spoken to honestly. She looked at me. Something in her expression changed. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a mechanism that has been running at high tension encountering a surface it does not have to push against. Okay, she said. One word. But it arrived with a different quality than her previous responses. Not compliance. Actual consideration. Okay, I said. Outside the window, the grounds of the Vale estate continued in their manicured silence. No one, in her history, had given her a structure that included her in its construction. I was not certain I knew how to build it. But I was, for the first time since the oak-paneled office, certain that I wanted to try. I found the letters by accident. The sitting room between our rooms had a writing desk against the east wall, old wood, the kind of desk that had been in that room long enough to stop being noticed. On the fifth day, I was looking for a pen and opened the shallow center drawer and found a bundle of papers held together with a piece of string. Not private correspondence in the sense of something sealed. Just papers. Some of them handwritten. Some of them printed. The top sheet was a pencil drawing of a woman, unfinished, but the care in the line work was precise. I recognized Serafina's handwriting from the margin notes. She had this expression when she laughed. I keep trying to get it right. I closed the drawer. That evening I asked her who the drawing was of. She looked at me for a moment. Then she opened the drawer herself and took out the bundle and set it on the table between us. My mother, she said. I waited. She died when I was 11, she said. Cardiac event. It was fast. I was at school. When I came home she wasn't there anymore. She looked at the bundle. My father didn't know how to explain it. He didn't have language for that kind of thing. He was a person who managed problems and she wasn't a problem he could manage, and then she was a loss he didn't know how to carry. What did he do? He removed the variables, she said. I looked at her. She had a large social circle. Friends, cousins, a group of women she'd met through a charity she organized. After she died, he ended those connections. He said grief required privacy. He said people who visited to express condolences were actually processing their own loss at our expense. She paused. Some of that was probably true. And the rest? The rest was that he couldn't manage my grief if there were other people around who were also grieving. He needed the environment to be something he could control. She set the drawing on the table. So he controlled it. How old were you when the social world became smaller? 11, she said. Then 12. Then smaller. I had tutors rather than school by 13 because school had too many uncontrolled variables. We traveled, but to places he had arranged in advance with people he had vetted. People, I said. No one my age, she said. Not regularly. There were events. Formal ones. But in formal settings with adults, you learn to perform rather than connect. I became very good at performing. I thought about the drawing room. The way she had stood in the doorway. The way she had assessed the room before entering. When did you start noticing everything? I asked. She looked at me. I noticed everything before. My mother said I was the most observant child she'd ever met. But after she died, noticing became necessary. If you're in an environment with limited information about what's coming, you learn to read the small signals. She paused. The angle of my father's shoulders told me whether the day would be manageable. The speed of Mrs. Harrow's movements in the kitchen told me whether something had gone wrong. I built a map of everyone around me from their smallest behaviors. And when people came into your life, I mapped them, she said. Quickly. Completely. Because the information felt urgent. She looked at the drawing. Love was the same thing. If someone was important, the mapping became necessary. Where were they? Who were they speaking to? What changed in them when I wasn't nearby? You learned that love was surveillance, I said. She flinched at the word. Then considered it. I learned that love was attention, she said. Constant, complete attention. My mother had given me that. When she died, the attention disappeared, and the person who replaced it as the central figure in my life was a man for whom attention meant control. The two things became the same thing. I sat with that. The arrangements before me, I said. The two who left. I smothered them, she said simply. Not because I wanted to harm them. Because the monitoring felt like care from the inside. They left because from the outside it looked like something else. It was something else, I said. Even if the feeling behind it was care. She nodded. Not an argument. An honest agreement. I know, she said. I have known that intellectually for a long time. The knowing doesn't automatically change the response. I looked at the drawing on the table. The unfinished expression. Serafina trying to capture a memory of a woman she had been observing since memory began, working to render her accurately because accuracy was the only form of love she had learned to trust. Your father isolated you, I said. To protect himself. And told himself it was to protect you. Yes. And the patterns you developed inside that isolation became the thing every subsequent relationship had to contend with. Yes, she said. And couldn't. I looked at the window. I thought about my father's office. The forged signature. The chair arranged for me before I arrived. The decision made in my absence and presented as a conclusion. I thought about how different the mechanics were from Serafina's father's choices. And how similar the result. Children managed rather than consulted. Lives shaped by the preferences of people who called their preferences protection. Serafina, I said. She looked at me. What you do, I said. The watching, the monitoring, the jealousy, the glass, the chair in my room at 6 in the morning. That is not who you are. It's what you developed to survive an environment that gave you nothing reliable. She was very still. The people before me left because they encountered the behavior and couldn't locate the reason for it, I said. I'm not leaving. And I'm not afraid of the behavior. I'm telling you the reason I've located. She looked at the drawing of her mother. If I fight you, I said, you'll spiral? I understand that now. Yes, she said quietly. So I won't fight you. I paused. But I'll tell you when I see the behavior and I'll ask you to find me the feeling underneath it. Every time. Until the feeling has somewhere to go that isn't the behavior. She looked at me for a long time. You're not frightened of me, she said. No. Everyone is frightened of me. Everyone was given the surface and not the underneath, I said. I'm asking for the underneath. She looked at the drawing. Then at me. That's the most dangerous thing you could ask for, she said. I know, I said. You'll see everything that's broken. I'm already looking, I said. I don't see what they called unstable. I see someone who was handed very poor tools for a very large task and has been trying to build something with them ever since. Serafina sat very still. Then she picked up the drawing and held it carefully. She would have liked you, she said quietly. Tell me about her, I said. And she did. For the first time in a very long time, someone let her. My father called on a Tuesday morning. I was on the grounds of the Vale estate, walking the west path that ran along the old stone wall, the one I had taken each morning for the 6 weeks since December. Serafina sometimes joined me. Today she was still at breakfast talking to Mrs. Harrow about something in the East Wing, which 3 weeks ago would not have been possible because 3 weeks ago she did not speak to Mrs. Harrow except to redirect her movement patterns. This was progress. Small, daily, structural progress of the kind that didn't announce itself. I saw my father's name on the screen and let 2 full rings pass before I answered. Elliot, he said. His voice was the oaken consequence one. The one from the office. Father. I've been reviewing the partnership timeline with Alistair. The formal contract requires your attendance at the legal signing next month. I'm aware. I'm also calling about the second installment discussion. Alistair has indicated he'd like to revisit the capital structure once the contract is formalized. What does that mean practically? It means the 200,000 was the first phase. A successful marriage and integration into the Vale family structure could open discussions about further investment. I walked the stone wall path. Further investment, I said. This is how these partnerships develop, Elliot. The initial arrangement secures the relationship. The relationship then becomes the vehicle for ongoing. I understand the structure, I said. Good. Then you understand why maintaining a stable presentation at the signing is critical. Stable presentation. You and Serafina. United. Giving Alistair confidence that the alliance is sound. I stopped walking. Are you asking me to perform for Alistair Vale so that you can access more capital? A brief pause. I'm asking you to fulfill the purpose of the arrangement. Which is to secure the family's financial relationship with the Vale Group. I looked at the stone wall. It was old enough that the mortar between the stones had weathered into something irregular, no longer perfectly uniform, shaped by the years rather than by the original intention. Father, I said. I want to be clear about something. Of course. I'm not your asset anymore. Silence. I understand that's how the arrangement was designed, I said. I understand that the letter of intent positions me as the connecting element between 2 financial interests. I'm telling you that I've made a decision that precedes the contract, and the decision is this. I'm here because I'm choosing to be here. Not because of the capital. Not because of the signing. If the partnership produces financial benefit for Ashford Development as a secondary consequence of something I've genuinely built, I won't object to that. But you don't get to direct the terms of what I'm building in order to access the capital. My father's voice when it came back had a specific quality. The quality of a man recalibrating. Elliot. We can discuss the signing attendance when the date is confirmed. Call my phone, not Harlan. I ended the call. The stone wall stood in its irregular silence. I put the phone in my pocket and finished the walk. Serafina was in the sitting room when I came back inside. She was at the writing desk, not the center drawer but the side one, where she kept a journal I had never asked to read and she had never offered. She looked up. Your father? She asked. Yes. He calls every Tuesday. I looked at her. You've noticed. You're quieter afterward, she said. Not sad quiet. Resolved quiet. Like you've answered something. I sat down. He wanted to discuss the capital structure post-signing. More money. Potentially. She turned in the chair to face me. He thinks of you the way my father thinks of me. How so? As an instrument, she said. Something to be deployed correctly for maximum return. I looked at her. Yes. She considered this. Does it make you angry? It used to, I said. Now it just clarifies things. She nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I didn't panic when you left for the walk this morning. I noticed. I knew where you were going. Not because I tracked it. Because it's Tuesday and you always walk the west path on Tuesdays when the light is right. You still mapped it, I said. Yes. But I didn't feel the urgency the same way. She looked at the desk. I didn't feel like the information was emergency information. It was just information. That was the distinction. Small, significant, structural. How did that feel different? I asked. Like breathing, she said, instead of holding my breath. I sat with that. She had been doing this across 6 weeks. Small adjustments, each one preceded by her telling me what she was feeling before she acted on it, which was what I had asked for. Not always perfectly. Twice she had appeared outside a room I was in without intending to, caught herself, told me afterward, and we had talked about the feeling that had preceded it. Urgency, she had said both times. Not specific urgency. Just the ambient urgency of someone who had learned that things disappeared without warning. We were building a different internal language for that urgency. One that gave it somewhere to go. The sitting room door opened. Victor Vale stepped in. He was Alistair's brother, the one who managed the family's private investment structure, 3 years younger than his brother and considerably more present in Serafina's daily life than I had initially understood. He looked at me. Then at Serafina. Then at the sitting room, which had clearly been arranged for conversation rather than performance. Sarah, he said. Your father wants to see you. She looked at me once, briefly. Then at Victor. I'll be there shortly. He said now. I'll be there shortly, she repeated. Victor looked at her for a long time. The look of someone who has been in the habit of reading compliance in a particular face and is encountering something new there. His eyes moved to me. Mr. Ashford, he said. Measured. Careful. Victor, I said. He left. Serafina watched the door after it closed. He doesn't like it, she said. Like what? That I'm becoming someone he doesn't already know how to manage. I looked at the closed door. He's been managing you, I said. For years, she said. My father sets the framework. Victor manages the details. She paused. I was one of the details. I sat forward. Serafina. She looked at me. Tell me about Victor. Her expression moved through something careful. That, she said slowly, is a longer conversation. I looked at the closed door. Outside the sitting room, the Vale estate continued its measured, managed existence. Something in its management had just noticed it was losing grip on one of its variables. I had been one of those variables once. I understood exactly what that noticing felt like from the other side. Victor requested a meeting on a Thursday. Not with both of us. The request came through Mrs. Harrow, relayed to Serafina, framed as a family financial discussion that would require her presence and mine. When Serafina showed me the message, she read it twice with the particular expression of someone who has been inside a system long enough to recognize its grammar. He frames things as requests, she said. They're not requests. I know, I said. What does he usually want when he calls it a financial discussion? To remind me of what I depend on. She set the message down. The trust structure my father established gives Victor administrative oversight of my personal holdings until I'm 30 or married, whichever comes first. He uses the oversight as proximity. Proximity to what? To everything I do, she said. Every expenditure requires his sign-off. Every property decision. Any investment I might make independently. He has to approve it. She looked at the desk. He told me once that he does it because he cares about protecting me. He said it the way people say things they want you to believe because they need you to believe it. And you believed it. For a long time. She looked at me. It was the same language my father used. Care and protection as justification for control. I didn't have enough outside perspective to identify the difference. You do now, I said. She was quiet for a moment. That's why he's calling the meeting. We went on Thursday at 2. Victor's office within the Vale estate was on the ground floor, east wing, a room that communicated authority through its arrangement rather than its size. He was seated when we arrived and did not stand, which was a choice. There was one chair on the guest side of the desk. 2 people, 1 chair. Serafina saw it and said nothing. I saw it and said nothing. We both saw Victor watching to see what we would do. I moved a second chair from against the wall and placed it beside the first. Victor smiled. Please sit. We sat. I wanted to discuss the contract timeline, he said, and some concerns about the transition. What concerns? I asked. Serafina's trust structure has specific provisions about external influence during the transition period. Anyone with access to her personal time and decision-making falls under the oversight clause. He looked at me. I want to ensure the oversight is being respected. Are you suggesting I'm in violation of an oversight clause? I asked. I'm suggesting we clarify the parameters. Then clarify them. He leaned back. Serafina's holdings require approval for any decisions made in consultation with non-family advisors. If her behavior, her routines, her decisions have been influenced by... Elliot isn't a non-family advisor, Serafina said. Victor looked at her. The look he gave her was practiced. The look of someone who had been the authority in a dynamic for long enough that pushback registered as unexpected weather. You're not married yet, he said. No, she said. But I'm engaged. And the engagement was Alistair's arrangement. If you want to argue that my fiancé doesn't have appropriate standing, you'll need to take that to my father. A silence. Victor redirected to me. Mr. Ashford, I want to be direct. Please. The arrangement between our families was designed to stabilize a specific dynamic. Serafina's history of difficult attachments has been managed carefully. What I'm seeing in recent weeks concerns me. What are you seeing? I asked. Independence, he said. The word arrived flatly without irony, which told me he hadn't noticed the irony. And that concerns you, I said. It concerns me because it's inconsistent with her management needs. I looked at him for a moment. Then I opened the folder I had brought. Not dramatically. I set it on the desk and opened it to the first page with the same care I had used returning my father's contract folder across a different desk several weeks ago. I've spent the last 3 weeks looking at your investment portfolio, I said. Specifically the Meridian Verde Fund. The one structured through the Vale Secondary Holding Entity. Victor looked at the folder. It's a good structure, I said. Most of it. But there's a beneficial ownership disclosure issue in the 3rd tier that creates exposure under current reporting requirements. It's not a fatal problem. It is the kind of problem that becomes significantly more visible if anyone begins looking at the trust administration with regulatory interest. Victor's expression did not change dramatically, but something shifted behind it. I'm not threatening to report anything, I said. I want to be completely clear about that. I'm telling you what I found because I want you to understand that I have looked carefully, and I understand what I'm looking at. What is it you want? Victor asked. 2 things, I said. The first, the trust administration reverts to Alistair's direct oversight, removing your day-to-day control of Serafina's holdings. The second, the oversight clause you referenced is removed from the contract before the signing. Those are significant asks. They're reasonable ones, I said. The clause was written to manage someone who was being managed. The situation has changed. Victor looked at Serafina. She met his gaze. This was the part one had not staged, had not rehearsed, had not asked her to perform. She simply sat in her chair and looked at her uncle with the clear, direct attention she had been developing across 6 weeks of learning that her gaze did not need to be apologetic. You've changed, Victor said to her. Yes, she said. He's done this. I've done this, she said. He's been nearby while I did. A silence settled over the room. You don't own her, I said. And you don't own me. Victor looked at the folder. Then at Serafina. Then out the window where the shaped trees stood in their managed lines. I'll speak to Alistair, he said. Today, I said. He looked at me. Today, I said again without raising my voice. He nodded once. We stood. Serafina and I walked out of the East Wing office and down the corridor toward the sitting room floor, and she did not look back once to see if Victor was watching. That was the real victory. Not the folder. Not the disclosure exposure. Not the negotiation. The fact that she walked forward. Willingly. Without looking back to check if she still had permission. The contract signing happened on a Saturday in late March. The room was the same kind of room these things always happened in. Dark wood, afternoon light, lawyers on both sides of the table with the composed attention of people whose function was to witness rather than participate. Alistair at the head. My father beside him. My mother at her customary angle. Serafina sat beside me. Not performing the seat. Not monitoring the room with the urgent, comprehensive attention she had used in every formal space I had observed her in since December. She sat with the particular quality she had been developing across 4 months, present, clear, not tightly contained but genuinely settled. She had dressed herself without consultation. Dark green, her own choice. She had told me that morning she was tired of wearing white to things that were supposed to be about her. I had said nothing. She hadn't needed me to. The documents were presented in sequence. The lawyers narrated. Alistair reviewed the amended trust clause, which Victor had arranged to remove after the Thursday meeting with a speed that confirmed the Meridian Verde exposure was exactly as significant as I had assessed it to be. My father looked at the amendment once and said nothing, which was his version of absorbing a shift in position without ceding the appearance of having expected it. I signed my name. My actual name, written by my own hand, and I noticed the difference from the forged signature on the letter of intent with the quiet satisfaction of someone correcting an error that had been presented as a fait accompli. Serafina signed. She held the pen with the careful precision she applied to drawing, and her signature was exact. When the lawyers gathered the documents, Alistair said something brief and formal about the alliance and the future and the partnership that had been established. My father said something complimentary and equally formal. Serafina looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us said anything in the room. What we were had not been produced by the ceremony and did not require the ceremony to ratify it. 4 months after the signing, we moved out of the Vale estate. Not dramatically. Not as an escape. As a practical decision made between two people who had been living inside someone else's architecture long enough to understand what their own might look like. We found a building in the city, a converted warehouse, the kind with good bones and poor aesthetic decisions made by the previous occupant that could be undone with time. I had opinions about the structural elements. Serafina had opinions about the light. We argued about the light for 3 days. Specifically about whether the east windows should be left clear or given frosted treatment that would diffuse the morning quality into something softer. She said clear was too exposing in the early morning. I said diffused light was a compromise of the actual thing. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "You just argued against compromising the actual thing." "Yes. That's what you've been doing for 6 months." "I know." "Then the windows stay clear." We left the windows clear. She still noticed everything. I want to be clear about that because the story of her change is not the story of someone becoming less. She was not less observant. She did not stop reading rooms or tracking small signals or building maps of the people around her from their smallest behaviors. She redirected the skill. She began working with the Vale Group's charitable foundation, a position she negotiated herself with Alistair, leveraging the trust restructuring that had removed Victor's administrative oversight. The foundation managed grants for organizations working in child welfare and early education. She read the grant applications with the focused attention she had once applied to my breathing patterns at 6 in the morning. She noticed inconsistencies in organizational structures that other reviewers missed. She asked the questions that other reviewers were too polite to ask. She was remarkably good at it. The director of the foundation, a woman named Claudine who had been doing the work for 20 years, told me at a quarterly dinner that Serafina had identified 2 organizations in the previous cycle that had been misrepresenting their service reach. She noticed the language pattern shifted in the impact reports, Claudine said. 2 different authors. Same grant application. She caught it in the first read. She notices things, I said. She notices everything, Claudine said. It's extraordinary when it's pointed at something useful. Pointed. That was the word. The tool had not changed. The direction had. My father called less frequently. When he called, the conversations were shorter and more honest, which was a function of him understanding that the previous dynamic was no longer available. I was not cold with him. I did not carry the arrangement as a wound. But I did not pretend it had not happened, and the pretending had been the thing that gave him access to the previous version of me. He had sold me for $200,000. Not cruelly. With the same logic he applied to all his decisions. Identify the asset, find the leverage, secure the return. He had not considered that the asset might be the kind that understood its own value. He had not asked. None of them had asked. Not my father, not Victor, not the two families who had signed letters of intent using my name and Serafina's name as interchangeable elements of a financial arrangement. They had looked at us and seen instruments. They had not looked long enough to see what we were building. The morning I understood we had arrived somewhere real was ordinary. Serafina was at the clear east window with coffee, looking at the light she had argued against and then chosen, and she was doing nothing except looking at it. Not monitoring. Not mapping. Not calculating. Just standing in morning light, present without urgency. I stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. She turned her head without surprise. She had always known when I was nearby. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." She looked back at the light. The windows were the right choice. "I know. You don't have to say that like you expected it." "I did expect it." "That's smug. It's architectural confidence." She smiled. The one that was not performed. I thought about the office with the oak furniture and the forged signature. The chair arranged for me before I arrived. The number on the letter of intent. $200,000. The price my family had placed on me before I had sat down. What they hadn't understood when they set the number was that the number was the limit of their understanding. They had priced what they could see. They had not priced what I was capable of building. They had sold me for $200,000. What they didn't know was that I was priceless. Not because of inheritance or portfolio or the alliance that had been signed in a darkwood room with lawyers on both sides. Because I had walked into an arrangement designed to diminish two people and had chosen, every day, to build something else. And the woman at the clear east window, drinking her coffee in the morning light she had chosen, was proof that the building had worked. We had been negotiated. We had not stayed negotiated. That distinction was everything.